So this is the 6th of January 2017, and we have today there's been on the radio about the issues there are with forensics. This is in the UK, and forensics are a bit of a far cry from what you see on CSI and so on. On CSI and those sort of programs, the American ones, you see the forensics business as being quite tightly controlled. Excuse my heater. It's quite tightly controlled, and it's in government hands. And this means lots of things, but for one thing it means people stay in the same job, and they generally want to hold on to their jobs. So they generally won't try and make a mess of things, or try not to make a mess of things rather. It's not difficult to see what the problems are, but there was a lady called Gillian Tully on, who was talking with the Radio 4 people, like John Humphreys and so on, about the issues there are with the forensics situation in the UK at the moment, which are things like rape cases where evidence is being contaminated with cross-contamination, which means you've got bits of DNA or material from, one rape case turning up in another. So the classic situation, I suppose, is where you have a swab, and then that swab is put on a tray that has had previous swabs put on it from previous victims, and then that swab is then put in a container which is sterile. But you know, it's so I'll go through. There's two main areas that I see as being a problem. One is fundamental to the way the police work, which is fundamental to the way they work and check for evidence and put forward evidence at trial, and is common to any kind of evidence, be it forensics or otherwise. So that's one. But the other one, which I'll take first, is this particular issue of the fact that it's private companies, commercial organisations, quite small or maybe big, I don't know, that run the whole show of forensics in the UK. And that's where most of it's done. So the first problem that comes to mind is this: it's done on piecework basis, and it's done on a tendering basis. So every time there's any forensics to be done, the police will have to go, they know up front that there's going to be a cost, and then they'll have to go and get it tendered out. And I'm sure it's a relatively rapid thing, but it's a procurement issue, and they know there's a cost. Well, that puts a big difference in the mindset of the police, and I'm afraid will dictate their behaviour. So what will actually happen is, instead of them saying, oh, let's just get that in case, or let's do this test in case, or let's do that so we get a bit more information, they won't. Because every time they try to do anything, it's an extra few quid. So this makes them think twice before they do any test. We've got the same problem with GP surgeries and stuff who have to procure tests. They will go a long way and even make people possibly ill in order not to do any tests. There are several reasons for this, but one of the reasons is that it costs money every time you want to do a test, and everyone's concern is, coming back to the police, everyone's concern is that it'll turn out to be a null response, a null answer. So in other words, if you go ahead and test some item, let's say you find something at a crime scene, in a rape situation it might be on the actual person who's been raped, or at a crime scene you might find an implement of some sort, maybe a weapon or whatever, and you say, oh, we'll test that. Well, you're going to think twice before you even bother. Obviously, if somebody's been bludgeoned to death with a hammer and there's a bloody hammer, you'll check the hammer. But when it comes to other stuff, you know, you can go through the gamut, the door handles, a glass that was found on the table, half drunk, you know. You can go through all sorts of things and say, where did they draw the line? Well, I've got a horrible feeling that the line gets drawn just as quickly as it possibly can be, because each and every test will cost X number of pounds. Oh, that's another, oh. And then the worst thing, of course, is where you've done all your tests that you want to do, and then somebody thinks of one that you should have done that you didn't do. That would be a lot of inertia to go back and do yet another test. because that'd be another bill, that'd be another invoice raised. And with money being so tight, and cutbacks in the police hammering them, they will absolutely look to cut every corner there and spend the money on something else, like police overtime, or whatever it is, computers. So you get to the stage where what is a cornerstone of policing work has been farmed out. They're saying it's turning into a problem. I mean, it obviously is a hell of a problem. And the first report I saw on this was several years ago. So forensics is in a dire situation now in the UK. And this means that I would say the level of trust you can have in it is through the floor. Now, we're not talking about fingerprints as such, because fingerprinting, I mean, I saw someone come out and do that, and it's relatively low tech, and they take a picture of it. Heck, you could almost do it with a camera phone now, a smartphone. But when it comes to stuff like DNA and I mean, even the incident that was spoken about by Gillian Tully with John Humphreys this morning on Radio 4 on Today programme, the incident was where they found not only the DNA of the lady concerned who had been raped and the suspect that they were looking at, but they found an entirely different suspect's DNA from a completely different case. Unconnected. And the thing they have in common is that they went to the same CSI test centre, forensic centre. So, and they are sure that was a mistake and that is a cross-contamination issue. This makes me think that, you know, I mean, if I found a plate in my kitchen and there was some stuff on it from before, I go, oh, you know, I put the plate back to get washed again in the sink. I've got a feeling that the level of hygiene or forensic correctness, care that's being taken here is a lot below the level that I would have in my kitchen in terms of cross-contamination. I don't want a bit of lasagna from yesterday in my pudding for today, or my cornflakes or whatever, so I take a lot of care. I've got a feeling I take more care about that than they take about their forensics labs. Here's my big test for anything like that. They should have webcams in them 24/7 in the entire place except the lavatories, and there should be no problem with any police officer logging in to have a look at what's going on. This is the test that the nuclear industry has failed. I once went for a job in the Environment Protection Agency, and one of the big suggestions I put forward, and this is 25 years ago, one of the big suggestions I put forward was closed circuit TV, what we would now call webcams or whatever you want to call it. And I said you could keep them honest. I didn't use that phrase because that phrase wasn't in vogue at the time, but I said you could make a big step forward in watching them and in making them police themselves, the nuclear industry, by having webcams, CCTV as it was, throughout the nuclear power facility, in nuclear power stations. And obviously that would include the effluent areas, and it include the reactors, and it include where people are activating controls, and where emergency systems are, and where emergency suits are, and everything. And where logs are, accident logs and stuff, incident logs. And that's the way to sort this. If you insist on having the outsource, I mean, personally, I wouldn't even outsource it. I think it straightforwardly should be a government task. And you should have forensics labs that are actually nothing to do with the police forces or to do with the government, but a separate forensics department under the umbrella of policing and security in the country. And why, for God's sake, we don't have that, I am utterly baffled. Because the first thing with forensics is it must be perfectly right. The second thing is you must keep costs under control. And you should be able to do those things properly first before you do anything else. I don't think it's a problem doing it, but you have a private sector involved. It's going to make a profit. Well, you know, or at the very least, costs are going to be kept down because they know it's a tendering system, so the cheapest bid gets it. But of course, the cheapest bid assumes that behind the scenes everything is the same. You know, you could go to buy 2 cars, and those cars could be apparently on paper the same, but you go and see one and it stinks inside and you don't believe the mileage, and you go to see another and you say, oh, this is a straight car. And so for the same price, you say the cars are actually completely different. And so I say to you that the forensics can be completely different and the price can be absolutely the same. It should be a government department that is under the umbrella of policing and security, but God no, private tendering, buy them out and bring them under a nationalised department is the only way to go with that. Anything else I would say is completely ridiculous, and I speak as somebody who has worked in research in government and also worked in private organisations. And most of these things come down to the basics. So to me, you just go through the process of what they do and you see where the faults are. In forensics, it'll be they don't clean the instruments they use, it'll be the swabs get slapped onto a tray, it'll be something that happens behind closed doors sometimes because they don't want anyone to see. You're dealing with vulnerable people who have just been assaulted in rape cases, and I'm afraid that you might think people would treat those people with more care. Nothing could be further from the truth. I've seen how organisations treat vulnerable people. Vulnerable people don't answer back, so organisations can treat them like shit. So you mustn't believe that they'll get treated well, or that people will be particularly careful with the swabs and stuff that they use for that person. Sorry, that's just the way it is. This all comes down to the basics. How basic you have to get in organisations was brought home to me on several occasions, but the most classic of which was in a factory I was in Salford. And to be frank, forensics is most like a factory process. So they had this massive machine that they couldn't run properly, and this machine did this particular task. It was the size of like half the size of a basketball court or something, and this wouldn't do this job properly. You couldn't get it to work. The engineers were going to meetings and stuff, and all sorts of things were going on. The managing director was getting involved, and the company that oversaw the company was getting involved, the overarching organisation that owned them. And after 4 or 5 meetings, weekly meetings, I was just a newcomer, and believe me, I got loads of stuff wrong, but this was something I got right. I said, where's the manual? This is a massive machine. I said, I've got a bicycle and a little 250cc motorcycle, both of which have manuals, even though I know how to turn pedals around and I know how to twist the throttle on a motorcycle. I said, but in pedantic Japanese detail, they tell you how to operate the machinery you bought. There is no way, I said, that £250,000 or £500,000 machine that's half the size of a basketball court or whatever, there's no way that thing doesn't have a manual. And the engineers went, and I was astonished. I was embarrassed to say it on their behalf, and I was even more embarrassed to find that nobody had the manual. Then they went and found the manual after a week or two of and they didn't tell me because they weren't keen to tell me. Somebody else blurted out during the meeting, I think it was the manufacturing director or manager or whatever. He wanted me to know, I think, that I'd been on the right lines, and they'd found the manual and they routed the material properly through the machine, and away it went. It was in some salesman's drawer. And there you go, RTFM, read the manual. It's you stick to the basics and you just do it properly, and it's amazing how things don't get contaminated then and things are done properly. We cannot trust anything but that we have total control over these things, and the business of it going out to tender. You will find that this utterly affects the law. When you go to some police station and you have a problem, they will be incredibly reluctant to do anything, even pick up the crime and give it a crime number, because they know immediately that this crime will require forensics, because most crimes do, or could benefit from forensics, because almost every crime could. And immediately you're in, before they even give it a crime number, they're thinking, should I kick this to touch, because it's going to be relatively hard and resource heavy to solve it, and it will involve forensics that we know we'll have to pay out money for per piece on a piece basis. We've tied ourselves in knots with it. It's utterly stupid. Should never have got here, but there you go. When you go commercial mad and you want it for the cheapest possible price, you pay the price that you can't even trust the work that gets done, and you get what you asked for. And it might not be what you want, but it's what you've in effect worked towards. So it has to come back in-house under the government and under a department that's to do with policing and security, but not partisan, i.e. owned by particular police stations or police forces. Thanks for watching, listen.